Welcome to Let's with Amplify, where we have lively entrepreneurial talks focused on helping you grow your business through sound financial strategy. Here are your hosts, Jamie L. Smith and Jesse Ferguson.
All right, we're back. Let's with Amplify, lively entrepreneurial talks. Are you excited for this one, Jesse?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So the first topic we're going to talk about today is Apocalyptic Tripwires, 5 surprising reasons businesses fail. Can you guess why we're talking about this, Jesse? Any ideas?
Because a lot of businesses fail.
That's true. And also, our friends at Heart told me that we should pick topics that people are searching for. And guess what people are searching for in our community? They're searching about...
Why businesses fail.
Well, they are, yes. And also they're really into this apocalyptic ideas, right? You've been watching The Last of Us, right?
No, I haven't.
Do you know what it is?
No.
So it's a good thing we're here to talk about the business part of it, because yes, the pop culture we would not be inspiring anyone to be paying attention to. So The Last of Us was the amazing HBO series that was filmed in Alberta. And it is about a failing human society and failing human bodies. We're going to stick to just businesses. Okay. And today we're going to talk about not the common reasons that businesses fail, but the surprising ones. And this is a conversation that you and I have had many times, and I'm really excited to share it with our Let's listeners. So before we get into surprising reasons why businesses fail, let's talk a bit about the common and often cited reasons that businesses fail. And those include cash flow. We have another Let's with Amplify episode on cash flow and how to prevent that very, very common reason why businesses fail. In fact, I think it's something like 86% or something like that always cite cash flow as one of the reasons that a failure happened. There's market research, there's knowing your client, there's team issues, there's market demand, there's business plan and strategy, there's access to capital. Those are all the reasons that are on the Stats Canada, the Investopedia, every single website when you search business failures, what you'd find. And obviously we see them. They're commonly cited because they are the most common reasons businesses fail. Any thoughts on those before we jump into the surprising ones and the ones that are less talked about and less prepared for?
No, those all sound pretty common for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So the ones we're going to talk about today aren't talked about as often, but they're really, I think, intriguing to spend some time discussing because we do see it happen, and they're usually take the founders and the teams by surprise. And as a result, the risks related to these failure reasons are less prepared for, less mitigated, and certainly not what is expected when you get into business. So we're going to talk about campaigns that are too successful. We're going to talk about using other people's money. We are going to talk about cash flow briefly in terms of the fact that it's a growth challenge and not necessarily a distress issue. We're going to talk about a North Star and how so many companies don't have one. And we're going to talk about companies that are just way too risk adverse. So those are the 5 topics for today's podcast video series, and I'm excited to jump in. So the 2 successful campaigns, an exciting one. I know that your pre-Amplified days, you've definitely seen some of the inventory issues or big box store issues that can happen when you're too successful on your sales. And the 2 of us have had lots of chats about this. But just to put it in perspective, the idea is that people will hire or invest in marketing and sales with really, really big goals and big ambitions. And due to a lack of planning and often, frankly, cash flow forecasting and forecasting period, they're actually not able to deliver when they succeed. So some of the common ones we see is you get a contract with a big box store, and it turns out that those terms and conditions are way more sophisticated or way more burdensome than you have the cash to invest and succeed with. You know, there's the old Groupons or what have you, where people end up flooded with brand new customers and they weren't able to deliver on those coupons. There's all kinds of situations like this. And I think it's especially sad and ironic because you put the time and effort into a great brand, a great campaign, your marketing resonates, obviously, your sales close, and next thing you know, that success is exactly why you're struggling and why you don't have the money to move forward. You don't have the team, you don't have the assets, you don't have the resources. So it is one of the more ironic and sad reasons that we're going to talk about today. And Jesse, tell me some stories of where you've seen this happen.
I mean, the one that comes to mind right away would be, had a business that I was involved with that was trying to get into Costco and didn't realize, it was pointed out very late in the process that the return warranty and sell-through requirements meant that if you didn't meet those kind of KPIs within that contract, they could send all the product back. When you ran what that looked like from a financial perspective, it basically bankrupted the company. So, yeah.
And so, I mean, if you think about it, if you're going to get into a big box store like Costco or Walmart or even the online stores these days like Amazon, etc., you can put a lot of effort into that proposal and that pitch and the brand and what's going to resonate and showing that you've done the market research. And so that's a massive upfront investment. And then if you win, like the story you're talking about, you obviously have to create that product and inventory and put all of that cash and effort into the product itself. And obviously all of that is with the intent of getting a decent margin and a decent return. But how frequently do companies think about the ability for the contract to have results in someone returning all that inventory or the warranties or what have you, and think it's a bit of a surprise, right? Like how many clients expect this when they're going into this type of campaign?
You say expect it. I would say a lot of clients go in blind. There's two types of clients. They're either driving blind or flying blind, or they haven't weighed, they're aware of it, but they actually haven't weighed the downside and upside risk. The downside risk is obviously what I just described in terms of like what could go wrong. But there's also an upside risk. What if it goes really, really well? And, you sell through like crazy and you don't have anything to, I guess, continue to meet that demand, or your production team, if you're in a kind of a manufacturing environment, or services team, how you can deliver the service, really the connection between operations and sales. How prepared are you to meet that kind of growth? Most organizations aren't, I would say. Yeah.
Right. So if we think about like those manufacturing examples, there's potentially assets and a CapEx expenditure that's required in order to fulfill that new level of inventory or manufacturing, which maybe hasn't been put into the thought process. To your point, probably...
Well, have you talked to your suppliers to see even if they can get you...
Exactly. If you think about, even if I think back to my distillery days, right? Like you can't get a still that would show up any earlier than 6, 8, 9 months. So you need to have that proactive planning in terms of even ordering those assets and equipment in order to meet those expectations, even if you have the ability to from a cash flow perspective, right? So there's a lot to the success. There's a lot of strategic thought.
Yeah, strategy and planning would be, I think that was on your list, wasn't it? Oftentimes a lot of strategy and planning go into starting a business, I would say. And, that's probably a reason why early stage companies would fail. But once they've passed that early stage into kind of that first stream of, okay, we have customers, we have, the ability to generate revenue, customers that want our product. But now you're into the stage of, more people want our product or service, and they kind of forget about the planning that they did to start the business, I guess. So planning should be something that's, not put on a shelf.
Absolutely.
Right.
And sometimes we get so busy doing the short term.
You're consumed by the business as usual day to day that you forget to pick your head up and say, what if?
What if you're successful or what if you're not? Exactly. The other thing that we see is, just even that classic Google ads. So that's a small campaign in some cases. It can be an expensive campaign and a complicated campaign as well. But interestingly enough, a number of clients have had incredible success with Google Ads, but then what they found was that, yes, they got new customers and new revenue, but oftentimes those that click and purchase aren't necessarily sticking around for the long term. So those are one-time customers, or each time they're doing a small transaction or purchasing a small service or what have you, they're shopping every time. So then the lifetime value of the client is not significant. And then when you start thinking about it from that angle, the cost that you spent to acquire a client that you don't get a chance to serve more than once, the math doesn't end up working all that well, because you're spending a significant amount to get them, but then you're not keeping them. And so, I mean, have you seen many clients with that type of marketing campaign and success, but unexpected cash failures or service issues because there's not that relationship and loyalty? It's very transactional.
Yeah, I mean, we were looking at that for ourselves internally. I think that's the nature of the beast. You're always going to have a little bit of that, but I think if you, at the end of the day, if you're dictating the terms on how you want to work with people and how you, I guess, evaluate and measure the importance of each client, then customer, I think you can manage it and still make money off a transactional client, but you have to be prepared to, I guess, disaggregate your client base and treat them accordingly, right? Not every client's equal.
And not every revenue dollar is equal.
Correct.
Absolutely. And certainly there's a number of businesses where high volume transactional base is critical to their success.
Totally.
Like if you think about selling hamburgers at McDonald's or widgets at Walmart, those are successful.
Right. But they've set the terms of how not everyone's getting a customized burger every single time they walk into, McDonald's. I guess you can, but you're going to get upselled.
Yeah, and the person behind you will
25, 30 seconds. And yeah. Exactly.
They'll demotivate you.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else about successful campaigns that we should drive home before we move to the next surprising reason businesses fail?
No.
I think that the key here is really setting that plan. And as you mentioned, and yes, you might be taking something that's the blood of your business and is a proven success and an established brand. But when you're going into this new campaign, figuring out what does success actually look like? What does failure look like? Where do we break even? Can we afford the assets, the team, the resources, the inventory to fulfill a success? And if we can't, where do we have capacity restraints so that we actually can make this better for our business? And I think that a lot of times we get super excited about the idea of a campaign and about success, that we don't step out of the sexy, fun marketing, sales, exciting yellow ball chasing to put pen to paper and to put a forecast in place and figure out what it really looks like, both from a number perspective, but also a resources perspective. So I think, it's nothing sadder than seeing a business struggle or fail because of a successful campaign. I think that we're starting sad, but we'll get more optimistic. Other people's money. So this one's always fun. I mean, we've talked about how in order to fund growth, there's a decision to be made. Do you want to fund your growth through debt, which is inherently someone else's money? Do you want to fund your growth through equity, which is diluting your ownership and is truly other people now owning and providing the money? Or is there a way to do it with organic working capital, et cetera? And I know, even if we're going to get vulnerable and talk about Amplify, when we fund new things, we make sure that we have the debt available and that that BMO has given us what we need to fund that new idea. But then to the large degree, we're trying to actually fund it through working capital. So it's a bit of a hybrid and combo approach. I'm a big believer that if you bite off the hand that feeds you by bleeding working capital and bleeding successful business lines in order to fund new ideas, that is generally not the best practice. But again, there's no absolute answers in business ever. But there's consequences when it comes to other people's money. So maybe before we talk about how that could lead to a failure, Jesse, what are your thoughts? Debt, equity, working capital, what are the key things to think about? And do you have a best practice answer if you were to speak in absolutes, which you would never do?
No, never. I mean, I think it just depends on your risk tolerance at the end of the day. If you have a very high risk tolerance, I think you can grow a lot quicker with, bringing in liquidity and capital through third parties, or friends and families, I guess, related parties. It's not something that, that comes with drawbacks as well in terms of expectations from other people because, they're giving you money for something. Generally, it's not because they love you, although maybe the friends and families, but they will hate you pretty quickly if you lose their money. But, yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on your own risk tolerance and, I think you get into business so you really don't have a boss. I mean, ever really true? But you'll have a boss real quickly if you got demanding shareholders and debt holders asking you a lot of questions, and life can become pretty miserable pretty quickly. So for some people, that's totally fine. They see they have a big vision and they think they can get there quickly. And sometimes that's what it takes in terms of market opportunity, right? Like you have a window and you're either going to capitalize on that or you're not. And, slow growth and, funding it through your own retained earnings is not really an answer. And obviously it depends as well on what kind of industry you're in and how capital intensive it is to actually get started and whatnot. So really depends. So definitely not absolute, pretty gray.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny because just as a quick aside to your point about having bosses, I was out with a banker for drinks the other day, and he said to me, he called me self-employed. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, you're your own boss. I'm like, I don't think you understand my life at all. I've never had more bosses in my life. And none of that is because of other people's money. It's just because of, mostly working with you, I guess. But when you have a team, when you have investors, when you have a partner, the concept of being your own boss is probably one that drives people into entrepreneurship, but I don't know if they actually ever feel that they met that goal. Not if they're going to be successful and surround themselves with people anyways. But, I think all of those points are exactly leading into what can result in failure is recognizing that if you do take other people's money, and obviously to some degree that can be through debt, especially alternative financing would have more in common with the equity side, but certainly equity and taking people's money as investors, they are doing it for a reason generally, as you mentioned. And so what can those reasons drive you to do that you might otherwise not decide to do if you had all the choices in the world? And I mean, some of the ones that we see can be a more short-term focus, right? So the runway is short, and those investors have a payback period. And a lot of times, the investors that invest in the riskier startup or early stage businesses have a very clear mandate in terms of how quick they want to see success and payback. And I mean, if we think about it from their perspective and turn around and go into those investors' shoes, they might be investing in 10, hoping that, 8 of them pay them back and 1 or 2 of them actually give them a return. And so if that's how they're looking at you as 1 of 10, 8 is a payback within a short period, and 1 or 2 is actual success, well, you're probably only taking their money with the hopes and dreams of being that 1 or 2. And so, that can be a misalignment right there because they want their money as quick as possible and they want in and out as quick as possible. But you, as the founder and the business owner, probably don't have quite as short term of a focus and might not recognize that you are playing a game that is inherently shorter term. And I mean, you've dealt with private equities and lots of times. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, there's usually a miscommunication gap in terms of expectations, I would say. Most private equities are getting involved in, a couple different scenarios. One is, a exiting founder, that business owner that is retiring and wants out of the business and he just needs liquidity. And in that case, I don't generally think, because management's kind of taking over, so generally there's not too much of expectation gaps there. But where, existing shareholders, management of the company, owner-managed businesses where they're taking that money, if they have a different time horizon than what, an outside investor has, then, and even just a return of capital, right? As long as, if those expectations line up, then usually I don't see a problem. Everyone's kind of on the same page. But, if there was, potentially, and sometimes, they're aligned before the sale, and all of a sudden 2 years later, opinions change, and that's not communicated very well, then that you generally find yourself in kind of a uncomfortable situation for one of the parties in terms of expectations. So.
Interested in diving deeper into the topic of this episode? Every episode of Let's with Amplify has an accompanying ebook for you to download absolutely free. Visit amplifyadvisors.ca/category/Let's Media to get access to the accompanying ebook for this episode. Each ebook helps you get the most out of the discussion that we have on each and every show. Head over to amplifyadvisors.ca/category/Let's Media to get access to the ebook now.
And it's interesting because when you talk about opinions changing, the reality is that most of the time you're taking other people's money because either you're a startup or you're starting a new department or region or service line or what have you. So it goes to be expected to some degree that opinions should change because there's a growth and a learning involved. So what you anticipate and plan and what actually pans out often will have differences. And, it comes down to what you're speaking of in terms of communication, right? If you're sitting there as a business owner, even if you think about us and when we started all of the services that we now have running, think about accounting services. It's bookkeeping. It should be a simple service line, but it's arguably the hardest subservice that we started. And why? Because how we started it and our opinions and our plan, and then what we learned from actually hearing from our staff and hearing from the market changed our mind. But that felt organic and felt natural to you and I because we were in weekly, daily meetings experiencing it and feeling it and seeing it. But that outside investor who's given you the money, they're not hearing any of that.
No, they're just looking at what the end result is, right?
And thinking it's going to be similar to the original plan.
Sure.
Yeah, it can be a bit of a challenge for sure. It's funny, I was out for a coffee with someone this week, and they mentioned that they consistently run into clients and business owners who are in special loans with their bank or turnaround service departments within their bank. And they actually don't even realize that that's a negative thing because they actually think that means they're getting extra help and extra advisory and extra assistance, which I've never heard that. I've never met a client that doesn't understand the challenge with being part of that department in the bank. But it's interesting to know that business owners are out there. And I think it's another example of not recognizing the risk of using other people's money and how expectations change. Have you encountered people that don't understand the difference between a regular lending environment and relationship manager versus when you move to that special loans department or what have you?
Most of the businesses that I see that go into special loans generally will have more professional management teams, so they're well aware because it makes their life a lot harder. I don't see a ton of owner-managed businesses in special loans, so that's interesting. It's interesting from the bank's perspective because if you got a 100% owned private company, I would think the first place the bank would start would be you start putting money back in, cash injection, second mortgage on your home or whatever versus kind of special loans. But yeah, I'd like to need to understand that more in terms of what type of businesses are going in. But yeah, certainly most companies, I went into special loans or was about to go into special loans as a CFO, and I definitely was well aware of, one, the cost of lending was going to go probably double, right? Your interest rates are going up, your fees were going up, because, well, all that extra service you're getting, I'll call it extra attention, it's going to cost you for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's another good example of how other people's money can run you into a failure situation.
Definitely.
So, as you mentioned, sometimes bootstrapping and focusing on scale or investing in your process automation or a paced hiring approach isn't possible, right? So if there's a window in the market or you're in a certain industry or what have you, it may be more of an absolute question, like either I'm going all in and I'm using other people's money or I'm not going to succeed.
Yeah, like tech is a perfect example. Like, sometimes you have a market opportunity and, look at chat, what is it called?
Chat GPT.
Yeah, I'm sure there was at the time of that kind of being invented, I'm sure there was a bunch of different of those companies all getting funded, and it was a race, right? And at that point, there's going to be one winner, probably.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? And so, but I think investors are probably, they're not looking at profitability and cash flow. They're thinking about, I guess, commercialization of a product to win a race. And if you win that race, you're going to be pretty successful. But I would imagine most investors at that point and founders are going in with their eyes wide open, I would imagine, other than everyone thinks they're going to win. There's only one winner.
Yeah. And I think, I'm not sure if everyone is going in with their eyes wide open, but I think that's the point to think about is traditional debt is obviously cheaper, less strenuous, but you need to be at a certain point before you can access bank debt, right? You need to be bankable. And what does it mean to be bankable? Well, it takes a history and usually a cash flow history. You can bootstrap it, which means that you're scaling through automation, paced hiring, and process, but you're going to have a slower road no matter how amazing your business is or how amazing your ideas or market share is. It's inherently a choice of slower. Or you can do more alternative debt that smells and feels a little bit like equity, or you can literally take other people's money. And I think there's obviously some hybrids in between, but there's risks, and there's risks to all those choices and all the combinations of choices that you make. And it's really important to see that through and know that it could lead to a business failure.
Definitely.
So the next one we'll breeze over really quick because it's growth cash flow challenges. We did our first video podcast, a full hour on cash flow, and a lot of that time was talking about how growth results in cash flow challenges. So I think we'd ask listeners to definitely revisit that, but maybe just to quickly summarize how growth can impact cash flow and how that can lead to a business failure. Jesse, do you want to revisit some of your favorite points on growth and cash flow?
No, you can.
Okay, I'd love to. Thank you. So we see that companies often don't recognize that the cash flow has volatility and changes when you're growing, and that's because new customers, new regions, new needs will all impact your cash and the timing. And so often people don't prepare themselves and do some really easy and tangible ideas that we go into in a lot of detail in our other podcasts in order to prepare and have that cash and know the timing. So when you grow, rest assured you will have cash flow challenges. And if you don't prepare for those, that can easily lead to business failure, which is not obviously the goal. The next thing that we'll talk about is North Star. So more often than not, we know that companies either do set their values and expect their teams to live their values, and they expect their salespeople to present their values in the sales and customer process, and that's well known. I don't know if it's always fully disciplined and acted on, but it's not uncommon for companies to set values and put the words on the walls, etc. We are becoming much more of a society where people run businesses that are purpose-led. We take the time to figure out what is our why, as Simon Sinek would call it, and know that we're here for more than just profit, and what's the purpose of our business, what's our bigger goals and our audacious goals. And obviously businesses recognize that they need to have a strategy, and they know that in order to achieve goals, you have to be strategic about getting there. I would say most companies know that these things are critical. Whether or not they actually put them in place is a different story.
You think most companies know?
I think they know. You don't think they know?
No.
Okay, give me some examples or thoughts on that.
A lot of companies of late that when you talk about that, it goes right over their head.
Like they don't even understand it?
They don't have them. They don't know why. When you're like, the importance of it, that's too fluffy. Yeah, I've had I was in a strategy session, a few months back, and they didn't have them. They didn't see the point of it. And yet they had a lot of employee issues.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
So you bring it back to that, and they're like, well, maybe this is a little more important than we thought. But yeah, there's a lot of clients out there. I think the good ones definitely know and are doing something about it. But I would say probably you could throw that into the mix of why businesses fail. Yeah, for sure.
That's interesting because it feels like, as an active reader of business literature, that you would feel
in your bubble.
in the bubble I live in. Yeah, maybe you're right. I feel like you would have you'd have a hard time not knowing it, but you might be right.
I come across a lot of people never heard of Simon Sinek.
Really, in business?
Yeah.
Some people don't know who Adam Grant is. Life wouldn't be as good if you don't know these guys. It's worth knowing them. Well, not personally, but knowing their products and thought leadership.
I think a lot of, there's lots of businesses that once they hit a certain scale and they start bringing in more professional coaches, that's generally where it gets introduced. There's some business owners who are obsessed with reading and continuous growth and learning, and they probably pick it up sooner. But there's lots of business owners, they just know what they know, and they live in their bubble, and they don't actually reach out for a lot of perspective, whether it be through business forums or coaches or reading or whatnot. So I think it's a mixed bag.
I guess there's a lot of reluctant entrepreneurs too, right? That fell into...
Or they think they already know it all.
Yeah.
Aren't actually looking for any help because their business is going great. They're making lots of money.
They don't need the help at that particular point. Fair enough.
Yeah.
So, there's the values, the purpose, the strategy. It's interesting. I was actually having a conversation just this morning where I was telling the forum group how we talk about values on a pretty much a daily basis at Amplify, and that, if I could run a cult, maybe we'd run a cult, but you won't let me. Which is probably good. But,
cults all go to jail.
Yeah, that's right. That's not the intent around here. So, at Amplify, we obviously spend a significant amount of time on our values, talking about them, using them, hiring with them. And I think we're getting so much better with our purpose and obviously with our strategy as well. One thing that we also do is we have the North Star of client experience for us, and we define client experience as, first of all, an outcome that happens when we live our values, and watch out for those blind spots and opposing behaviors that are the opposite of our values. And client experience is about always striving towards our purpose, which is enhancing communities, amplifying opportunities, and cultivating connections. But what differentiates our client experience may be compared to other business leaders and consultants, and especially CPA firms, is anchoring on the strategy and growth of our client. And it was funny, I don't have a great eloquent way of putting this, but the other day I recognized that, Jesse, when we named Amplify, I don't know if we were brilliant or even thoughtful. I do remember the emails and some of the other choices that I'm very glad we didn't pick. But it's turned out to be a name that is so much more meaningful to me than I realized at the time when we picked it, because it's really about taking businesses that are successful in their own right and amplifying them, right? And helping them with financial strategy and helping them get better. And so many consultants and business advisors go into businesses and try to drastically change or restart or just tear apart and rebuild their clients because they think they're the smartest guys in the room, or that they know the best practice or what have you. And I don't think most of our clients are looking for that. They want to be getting better. They don't want to be restarted or pushed down and brought back up. So it's interesting because client experience and the name of our company all tie in. It's about their strategy, their growth, and how we can amplify them. And so we've always had a dedication to a North Star. There's so many other North Stars that companies have. I mean, Amazon's a great one in terms of their customer experience and the simplicity and the ease of getting your product as quick as possible. Apple is obviously astonishing at their North Star, which is beautiful and simple and easy, and then, there's even the North Star of Walmart is most likely low cost, right? And all of these companies can have, are you the cheapest? Are you the best price? Are you quality? So many CPAs go into business as tax or audit compliance with quality as their North Star, which is great. Timely, accurate. There's all kinds of North Stars that you can have. White glove service, reliable, luxury. I mean, what North Stars have you seen be successful, and what companies have you seen that didn't have one, and maybe that's why they failed? I mean, Graft had a great North Star, didn't it? Or no?
Yeah, it was probably, Graft was built on, Swiss quality, right? Came from the Mr. Graff himself.
Oh, I thought it was wide feet.
Wide feet was, it's like, that was the how or the what, the end result. But ultimately, people with wide feet couldn't fit into boots. So, it was about comfort. It was about fit. That was their North Star, comfort and fit. And you actually see it on the skates. So yeah, that was definitely, I think if we go back to like why businesses fail, I don't think they hold true to why they actually, one of two things. Either they are getting business just to make a buck. If they happen to be successful, make the buck, then they keep chasing bucks, which then takes them in a million different directions, which ultimately sinks them in the long run. So that would be, one kind of, they don't know who they are and they're not following their core purpose of why they're in business in the first place. Again, going back to Simon Sinek. And then I would say the other reason would be they may know who they are, but they don't do a good job at the founders or the owners, whoever, leadership, don't do a good job at disseminating that kind of story through their people. And as they grow, it gets lost, and people at the mid to lower levels of the organization that actually are doing a lot of the work don't feel connected to that purpose, that why, that North Star. So it's a tricky game of like, one, do you have one? If you do, how do you execute on it? And I would say the execution piece these days is probably more of an issue than probably someone coming up with it and slapping it on the wall or putting it on the website or talking about it once a year at a retreat. So
yeah, and I think how do you execute on it? And I think examples that we've seen work within Amplify is you leverage it to help you hire. You use it in your marketing and sales. I mean, in some ways, it's like the lazy answer because you decide on your vision, your strategy, your purpose, your North Star, and then you can just use it in every parts of your business. Like it makes life easier. But you do have to have discipline and consistency with that. I mean, even if we think about our op models, like you're deep in strengthening the Amplify Tech op model. And I'm sure that when you're making those decisions and figuring out how to direct the team, that this is something that you're anchoring and going back to.
Yep, for sure. Yep.
And it keeps it consistent with our other departments too, right? A lot less conversations have to happen between you and I because we have these guardrails and we know what's acceptable and what's expected. Mm-hmm. I find too that when, as we lead leaders within Amplify and constantly help people with the challenges that they're experiencing, that if we bring it back to the values, they find the answer themselves so much quicker. Or if we bring it back to the North Star of client experience, that they need less and less of our assistance and leadership and guidance. Do you experience that with the team that you're working with as they're learning it?
Not so much.
Not yet.
Not yet.
They're early.
We haven't crossed that bridge yet. So
Yeah.
I'm sure it'll come. Not yet. But no, we do talk a lot about experience, and like I do think they're starting to pick up. I hear it a lot more in the language that they will be talking about communication and collaboration and things like that. And I hear them. We need to get better at this. Clients upset because we dropped the ball at this, i.e., maybe we didn't communicate well enough, so it's starting to come. But yeah, I would say we're not at the point where they're self-guiding themselves.
But they're starting to recognize the challenge and how it's associated with it. But they don't have the solutions yet.
Yeah, they don't.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
from
they don't have
evolution perspective.
Yeah, they don't have the guiding. They don't see the light up top and follow it on their own.
But they recognize how it's associated, the challenges associated. Yeah,
absolutely.
But that's a huge first step for a lot of them because they're very young.
Yep, for sure.
Young in Canada, young in age. Awesome. So, in conclusion on that North Star idea and businesses that don't take their values and purpose and strategy that one step further with the North Star, the opportunity loss really is revisiting and reinventing the wheel because you're not anchoring on something that is very understood by the market and the employees. And so when you have that North Star, it drives the ability to hire, to spend money, to build, all within a consistent framework because everyone understands that framework. And I think that's where the opportunity is in terms of decision making and leading a business for sure. The last one that we're going to touch on today is that too risk adverse. And so, obviously in the small and medium business and to some degree in the growth businesses that we work with, we don't necessarily run into this quite as frequently, but it's very common in terms of businesses failing. And we know of some Canadian businesses, if you think about BlackBerry or what have you, that maybe it's a lack of taking the risk of the new or reinventing themselves that resulted in not such great ends. So, you're short-term focused, you're quarter to quarter. Certainly if you're a public company, you're forced to be quarter to quarter. And as a result, it can be a lot harder to take big risks. When you have other people's money and those shareholders, investors, it can also be a lot harder to take those risks. Because at the end of the day, the vast majority of risks, I would argue, are somewhat of a big investment up front and a long-term result. Would you agree, Jesse, or do you think that's not a fair way of classifying risks?
Depends on the stage of the business, for sure. I find most businesses that I talk to are certainly willing to make sure bet investment, i.e. take risk where they see a direct payoff in terms of revenue. Where I think we differ would be where they don't see that direct correlation to revenue. Like very easy when you have, a contract in hand from a customer that wants to order X amount of widgets and I need to go to the bank and invest in a piece of equipment to make those widgets. Is that really risk taking? They might think so. I don't think so. Very different. Like, I'm going to hire 3 more salespeople because I think they can go out and get it. I'm going to invest in some underlying technology to help my operations run more efficiently. Don't know if it's going to pay off or not, but I think if I do it, it will be more set up to manage or handle that growth when it does come in. So I think Canadian businesses are generally much more risk averse when it comes to like not knowing what the future looks like and taking that bet versus definitely American counterparts, which are, it's very easy to convince an American to invest in this business. Very easy. Tell them why, tell them how, and they sign on the dotted line.
Yeah, like those Oracle numbers that we heard the other day of like 29 days average to buy an ERP.
Yep.
I don't know a human I've ever met that would buy an ERP in 29 days.
You.
Me. That's why I partnered with you so that there's no chance I would do something like that. You're right. If the demo was good and the person was charming
and the discount was awesome, for sure.
You're right. I might do it. But that's why I'm smart enough to partner with you.
You bought a lot of softwares over the day.
I have. None of those were hundreds of thousands of dollars, though.
Still money.
True. Well, the thing that you brought up actually is really interesting because sometimes it's those risks of hiring, right? Whether it's hiring a CFO, I mean, for what we sell, hiring an executive, hiring a sales team, hiring what could be perceived as back office. That is a risk that you don't see a lot of growth clients willing to take. You know, should we invest in our human resources and get that HR professional? Should we invest in our financial strategy and get that finance leader? Oftentimes, that's the risk they're not willing to take because they don't understand the direct line towards the return. Exactly what you mentioned, because it's not an obvious revenue. It's not a contract. It's not an exact customer that they're going to receive.
I think you can convince them of that for sure. Like, I think you can.
We wouldn't be in business otherwise.
Well, yeah, I think you can. I think you can draw the line, and I think they can actually you can lead them to that water. I just think whether they want to take that bet or not is where I see a lot of businesses kind of step back and say, I'm not willing to bet. And the reality is they're the same type of businesses that will, on the other kind of side of things, talk about how they want to grow, yet they don't want to invest. So you can't have one without the other. And again, that goes back to risk tolerance in terms of how much risk you want to take on in terms of those bets, because they may not always turn out well, and at least weighing the downside and upside risk of those bets is probably the first place to start, at least.
But there is that concept that if you're not growing, you're dying, and that's arguably not true for every industry, certainly, but there's some truth to the idea that if you don't take any risks and you try and ride stability too long, that it can be a slow exit or door to failure.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
And, to some degree, not taking a risk is equivalent of just not making decisions. Mm-hmm. And certainly that can lead to failure. So I think to wrap up the idea of being too risk adverse, the question is, does your forecast show all profitable, stable results with no costs, no burdens, no investments? And, that's a sure way of knowing whether or not you're taking risks within your business. Because if everything's stable, everything's, very standard, a little bit more than last year, you're not seeing big investments, you're not seeing big costs, big burdens, then chances are it's because you're not taking risks. And what is the consequence of not investing in your business and not investing in some risks?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, we moved on to NetSuite when we were quite small, quite in our infancy, and there's definitely a direct correlation now on that bet. Now, we didn't really have a choice being a partner, but we did look at it before we were a partner, and we actually didn't take that bet, right? We actually backed out of it. We chickened out.
Yeah, of moving to an ERP system, absolutely.
We talked our way out of it.
Yeah, it was sure. COVID, though.
It was COVID.
It was scary.
Yeah, it was scary. But, I mean...
Do you think we should have done it then?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, for sure. By the time we did it, we were too busy. It would have been a great time to do it project-wise, but we chickened out as well.
Yeah, for sure. But to your point, if we didn't have an ERP and NetSuite right now, I don't even know how I would do my job, to be honest with you, because
remember the one day when it was offline?
Oh yeah, we had to have coffee.
No one knew what to do all day.
That's what I mean. You and I had coffee. We hung out. Actually, that was kind of nice. Yeah. Maybe we should pay them to.
No. It's not.
Yeah, but I mean, honestly, on a daily basis, you're looking at utilization of time. You're looking at gross margins of jobs.
Billing, time entry.
Everything. I mean, it's so fundamental to our ability to scale and grow. And if we were still on the startup systems, well, we probably would just run blind because it would take too long to even bother understanding.
Totally. Yep.
Yeah, that's very, very true. So we've touched on these apocalyptic tripwires, 5 surprising reasons businesses fail. We talked about the too successful campaign, other people's money, cash flow challenges from growth, the North Star, and being too risk adverse. We recognize, obviously, that the more common cited reasons for businesses failing, like cash flow in general, market research, knowing your client, team, market demand, business plan and strategy, and access to capital, are more likely to be the reason a startup or even a 5-year business doesn't make it next year. But these surprising reasons, I think, deserve a bit of attention because there's ways to mitigate the risk. There's ways to put it in your strategy and in your financial forecasting so that it doesn't become a problem and it isn't the reason that the door is closed. So any last thoughts before we wrap up today's session?
Plan ahead.
Absolutely. Plan ahead. Put it in a quantified plan, even better. And then you'll know this is the risk and this is what I do if I hit that risk.
Eyes wide open.
Awesome. Well, thank you. This was fun.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Let's with Amplify. We hope you enjoyed the show and got some value out of today's talk. If you did, we'd love to hear from you. We invite you to leave a review on your favorite podcasting platform or comment on YouTube, and be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you listen so you never miss an episode. If you'd like to check out more information on all of our episodes and free ebooks, visit amplifyadvisors.ca/category/Let's Media. Production of the podcast is by At Heart Creative and can be found at atheartcreative.com.